Welcome to the Post-World Podcast.
Perfect. Welcome to the Post-World Podcast from Karl Marx Studios, Bunker Studios, somewhere hidden in Berlin. I'm Pablo De Negri, your host, and today's guest is Flossie Draper, who is a scholar, musician, translator, and also carries with the burden or the honor of being Walter Benjamin's great-granddaughter. Which one is it, the burden or the honor? Thank you, Flossie, for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really touched that you invited me on. A burden or an honor? I think it's certainly an honor. It's something that I've been aware of all my life. Burden, I probably wouldn't use that word, but there's certainly a heaviness associated with it because obviously his story is fairly heavy and, there's a sort of, maybe there is a little bit of a burden actually because I suppose when there's someone who is very well known, people expect you maybe to know a lot about him and like I'm not an expert in him.
Exactly, to be a specialist, academic specialist on your family member, let's say, which is a bit... but this happens a lot, even though not everyone knows Walter Benjamin, anyone that has studied arts or media or architecture or a lot of many other disciplines for sure knows him because he was so prolific in his writings and also the disciplines and the topics he reached. Mm-hmm. I don't like also this being the daughter of, the granddaughter of, or the great-granddaughter of. But since we know each other because we have friends in common and so, I found very interesting the things that, apart from the academic, let's say, knowledge about the thinker, no?
Sure, yeah.
And these parallelisms that could exist from your lecture, from your experience, when you had to make contact with his work in a way, and your special situation about also gathering information about your family at the same time,
Yeah. I feel like, well, obviously my route into his work was not academic. I was a child when
You studied at Oxford.
I did. I studied at Oxford.
Yeah.
Did he ever come? He never came up in the kind of philosophy I was studying because I did sort of Aristotle and the philosophy of language.
Right. I had to study him because I studied art.
Yeah. So I didn't really. This is what I mean about the guilt earlier. It's like I felt like I was like, I really should. Well, this is when I was a bit older, but like, I really should read, his most famous essays. But what I was naturally drawn to was just about finding out about him as a man, and I wanted, because he wrote little short stories of like fiction, and he wrote for the radio. I've done some work for the radio. I really like that kind of stuff. Right,
you worked on radio and you did some dramaturgy, something like that.
Yeah, I've done sort of acting. I did a lot of acting at university, so I've done plays. But I've done a few things for the radio. Just like I've also read some of my great-grandfather's works on the radio. But
you had to read something for the BBC, is that right?
Yeah, well, his fictional stuff, these short stories, they were being published in English for the first time at the London Review bookshop in London, and so I recorded something for that, and I think the BBC heard it and they wanted to use it, and it was played on BBC Radio 3.
Nice. And you were also the president of... what was it? President of Acting Society.
It was in my college at Oxford, like the Drama Society, it was the Union of Players, it was called. But so we put on plays, sometimes we made costumes. But I did a lot of acting in it, so I left the directing to other people.
Yeah. But you got in touch with Walter Benjamin's work mostly recently, am I wrong?
Yeah, I sort of delved into it more thoroughly recently. I mean, a year ago, I had it was the 80th anniversary of his death in Portbou in Spain, and I was asked to give a talk.
That's a burden part. No?
I mean, it was a stressful experience for me, but I came out of it actually, really pleased, like, I treasured the whole process because I did delve into his stuff a bit more, and I read it, and I just love the way he writes, like, and I think that, yeah, like some of the little stories are very, it's almost like there's one about a pipe that I really like, and it's like really short, it's half a page, and he's walking with his friends on an island where he's staying, and he reaches into his pocket to find his pipe because he fancies a puff. And then he realizes it's not in his pocket, and he says, yes, it must be lying on the table. We just passed the house I was in. I think it's on the table. So he says to his friends, I'm just going to get the pipe. And then he takes about 10 steps, and then he realizes, after all, that it was actually in his pocket. So then he walks back again, puffing his pipe through this sort of puff of smoke. And his friend looks at him, and he describes this sort of quizzical look, how he looks like a man who's awakened from a deep sleep. And then he says, like a whim takes him over.
Yeah.
And he says, there it was on the table after all, even though he knows that he wouldn't have had enough time. The man knows it's not true because it's not possible that he could have come back in that short time. Anyway, and then there's a pause, and then he says, why is it that you believed me? Like, surely you must have known that wasn't possible. And the guy says, well, I did think it was odd, but I thought, why would you lie to me? And that's it, that's the story. And I just really like it because it kind of...
You feel like a connection, you feel identified to the tone or
the way he writes it, and I just think why he even bothers to... It's just the way he notices these little moments is like his sense of perception that I find, I don't know.
Because I tell you why, I felt a very special connection to Benjamin when I had to read him. And I think he has this very special tone and warm.
It's gentle and it's kind, and it notices the really beautiful. The way he describes things, it's very detailed. Like in his descriptions of Moscow, in the Moscow diaries. Like there was this one description of a street sign, and he just talks about the street in general, and it's just you really can imagine his surroundings, the colours and the characters on the street, and then he talks about this sign and how it just sort of this dusty green blends gradually into this yellow, and the way it's written in German, like it just it just makes me, it's just so beautiful. I don't know.
He also translated for the first time Balzac, Baudelaire, like the cancelled, let's say the prohibited. These were the emos in a way, the first emos. In South Park, there's the Edgar Allan Poe that comes as a ghost, and he's like the emo, like Godfather, But actually, it should be Baudelaire, and Benjamin translated. He had this existentialist. Yeah. He perceived like the wrong side of where this outcome of the dichotomy, fascismus, communismus could lead to, and he felt. For what I studied from the philosophy part of view, he felt like trapped into this dichotomy, Yeah. But he had this kind of inheritance of a lot of thinkers and artists and writers and so that had this same shared existential urge, and felt very deeply about these systems that included violence in their core, Yeah. And even though he wrote about music exhibitions, painting, and this is also something in which he was a pioneer. He invented arts writing, we call it now, or cultural theories, and he always had this tone in a way. He always had this special sensitive, extra sensitive. So that's where I was curious and how, of course, if you're not part of the family or even close, and you can feel someone talking you so closely, I was, of course, intrigued on hearing your perception, your experience, your feelings into this process.
It's a very deep, sometimes... there are lots of things there are lots of ways I realised later in life that I think his whole story impacted me more than I realised at the time. killed himself. He took his life with morphine because he was trying to escape Nazi Germany. He was Jewish.
He was exiled in Paris, and when Nationalsocialism invaded France, he killed himself at the border of Spain.
Yeah, and
1940s.
When I read this, when I learned about this, the suitcase he had on, lots of people think that the Arcades project, some of his last work was in the suitcase, and it's never, it's lost. And when
masterwork, in a way, the life work.
And when I read about that, I had this visceral, I just felt so sad on his behalf, and I thought, how could you take that from him, but yeah, I don't know. So that whole story, and I remember, it's interesting because as a child, I remember thinking about things like borders. I had this idea that, that we should have open, borders should be open, you should be able to travel freely. And I also remember specifically thinking about ID cards and like how you should be able to falsify documents in case a government turns corrupt. This is when I was maybe 8 or,
Yeah. This, of course.
I used to think quite a lot about it, yeah.
And you believe there's this, now that you know something about him, and so do you believe there was already this like transgenerational something that was transmitted to you that you could say, okay, I know for sure that this is in part at least something of an inheritance, or
there's definitely and it's interesting because my whole discovery of him, it's all sort of fragmented, and I feel it kind of reflects this because his work is so full of fragmentation, and he talks about tradition and passing things on, this Überlieferung. And I feel like my whole discovery of him, I don't know, because I see, it sort of reflects that. And there's fragmentation in the family, there is this sort of, obviously, like, because his son, Stefan, lost his father, killed himself, so that's obviously going to affect him. And then, I think he was quite a depressive character, and then my mother, that it gets passed on, these things, you're not always aware of it. But I also have, sometimes I think I have a bit of a fear of authority with certain things, and I wonder whether that is connected to,
I think it's an empowering feeling. I'm also interested in your story because I have a great-grandfather that was a writer and a journalist at the same time, who were hanging around the same circles in a way. Wrote about the Russian Revolution and wrote about Berlin in the 1920s and so. And since my family is not so much like me, in a way, I always had the fantasy. I wasn't even sure it was for reals until recent years, but I had the fantasy that this can be the link, something that attaches you to the original roots or something, if it makes sense, And I also have a guilt because I never read him. Most of the works are in Italian. But definitely I can share this as a potential, or at least this feeling of this connection, you know, when you can relate. Of course, you can never know history, for sure, you know, but it can be really empowering, you know, especially when it has to do with being the black sheep of a family or a society or a culture.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's no coincidence that I've moved back to Berlin, like this is the city.
Because where did you grow up?
In London. I was born and grew up in London, but Berlin had this magic for me. As a kind of, part of my family history, this sort of, like, really homeliness, I don't know, as well as then later discovering, I had friends here, but I always had this different side to it. And when I came back, I don't know, when I arrived here, I kind of had this feeling of arriving home. And when I walked streets sometimes, I had this feeling of walking the streets that my grandparents and great-grandparents had walked down, and the places,
That's the thing also when you feel at home in a city that you've never been, but you have members of the family that were there and experienced a certain context that was very intense and wrote about it and gave their lives for a cause, One book from my great-grandfather is called Colori di Berlino, The Colors of Berlin. And of course, this was Berlin of 1920s, you know, it's not the Berlin we know, like after the war and so. And I was like, colors in Berlin.
Oh yeah, man.
This was a different
Wasn't
Berlin.
written in winter then.
It was a different Berlin. You know? But it's definitely a very intense journey when you start going through these paths, you know, and recognizing things in yourself and in your family. How is it? Is this like a presence in the family? Like, is a topic or is something?
Yeah, I mean, it's also, you know, I think in certain ways it's probably difficult for my mother. So it's like, it's become more of a topic maybe in recent years. But there are all these, I mean, there are definitely things that have been passed down. It's like his love of books is one thing. Like my mother's a librarian and she grew up with a printing press in her kitchen, you know, because her father was quite eccentric.
The love of books is something very important.
Yeah.
And it's very special when it's transmitted, usually from special particular members of the family to others. In my case was my grandfather, my mother, and then my brother and me. And this is the lineage of these black sheep, you know. And the love for books was only transmitted to this fine line, you know. The rest of the family is completely different. It's always something very special that is transmitted. I mean, transgenerational, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, and it's weird because, you know, he was a translator, like you said. He translated Baudelaire, and I've ended up as a translator, you know.
True.
He was interested in the radio, and I was, and these things, I kind of feel that they were sort of coincidental. I only really discovered them later. It's like, it wasn't. Yeah, I don't know. It was like, this is what I mean about this kind of passing on. It's like something has been lying dormant the whole time and then it sort of gets awakened, but it was always there. I don't know, this is what it feels like. It's hard to explain.
Sure, it's not, it doesn't, you don't experience it like a linear causality.
Exactly.
This is what's difficult
it's
to...
like a sort of, lightning, I don't know.
Right, and in a way there's a direction back and forth. There's a dialogue, you know, which of course make no sense from like a rational Euclidean linear way of thinking, but it makes a lot of sense for the condition of human perception on how we really experience the here and now, you know.
Well, he was interested in time as well,
my
great-grandfather. There's a really funny one, piece he writes about the radio, about... Yeah, I mean, I won't tell the whole thing.
No,
it'll
please.
take too long.
A synthesis, I resume.
I mean, it's funny because this guy has to give a radio talk. This is another little short story, and he's told it's his big chance, and he's going to like potentially get offered a job if it goes well.
Yeah.
And the guy says, okay, well, he gives him 2 tips or whatever. I can't remember what the first one is, but the second one is, you know, stick to the minute. Like, don't go, because the programming on the radio is really like, if you're too long, it'll throw everything out. And the whole, anyway. So he times his speech.
Time is a tyrant, they say on TV, or they used to say.
Yeah, and so
time is tyrant or something. At least in Argentina, they say that.
Time is a tyrant. No, that sounds familiar, actually. But he goes and practices it to the minute. And then basically when he comes in, he's like, he starts going, and then he sees the clock and he thinks, oh, shit, like, I thought that... am I allowed to swear?
What?
I'm allowed to swear.
Yeah, of course.
And
we can beep it,
no problem. And he thinks that his time has run out, so he rushes, and then he looks at the clock again and is like, oh, actually, I've still got loads of time left. So he has to completely improvise, and then he talks about, you know, the sensation in his ears, and it sort of gets quite sort of philosophical, and I can't remember all the details yet. And then he finishes, and it's all fine. And then he goes home and he asks his friend. He says, "Oh," because he knows that his friend listened, but he's curious because he's like, it must have been really weird because he had this big gap where he was flipping with his papers of silence for a minute, you know, when he was working out what to do. And his friend says, oh, yeah, no, it was really good, but, you know, there's something, the radio reception, you know, it's really bad again. The whole thing, it was out for a minute, you know. And I just find that really funny, and it reminded me of my mum's sense of humour, this kind of,
Yeah, it's a paradox
but
also, you know.
But there's more depth to it. Like, it's a funny story, but the whole idea of this time,
No, I understand perfectly. It's this paradox, oxymoron in a way, of something that is too far and too close at the same time, Actually, the ones who studied art, as I said at the beginning, had to read a particular book from Benjamin that is the work of art in the times of its mechanical reproduction.
Yeah, that's probably his most most famous thing.
That is actually, I think, coming back hard because of he was he really perceived things from where this was going, like a century from the time, in ways that no one wanted to see or to think, and this effect on the machinery of making something massive also had to imply the loss of something, and this was the concept of the aura he was talking about. And there's a lot of contradictions in technocratic and technological society, which we experience day to day in those terms, because we are so dependent on it. And sometimes I feel scared that this concept of aura that he was perceiving, he was talking about the work of art, no?
Yeah.
And but I sometimes afraid that we are so much into that direction that, for example, when we talk about
into losing it, you mean?
I mean, with digitalization, we really, like you say, Benjamin was obsessed with the concept of perception of time and space, and the aura also had to be with the being here and now.
Yeah, it's a physical.
The being here and now. This is what was being lost, and of course, in digital realm and how we experience things now is like a no place, And since we are going also towards I read a lot of science fiction, but life expansion or digitalization of consciousness. And so I have this awkward feeling when I feel that this concept of aura can stop being metaphorical to talk about work of art, can really be expanding our consciousness, for example, but losing the aura, like the real. It's a bit, I'm also emo, and I also tend to exaggerate things.
No, I'm just not an expert on him academically, so it's but I mean I do know a little bit, and I can.
And what did you research when you had to make this?
Well, I mostly I focused on him as a storyteller. So I read his essay, The Storyteller, and I read some of the Moscow Diaries. I read his fiction, stuff like this radio piece, some other short ones. I read a bit of his essay on translation. Obviously, I'm interested in that. But I thought about this. The storytelling thing I thought about most in this sort of age of information and.
It's amazing. He talks about. It looks like he's talking about now at some point.
And he talks about people coming back from war, mute and. Just the art of the storytelling thing as well, because he talks about one person passing on the story to the other. It's like there's it's like the craft in it. It's a beautiful and the art and the information is not a story. So it's there's more to it than just the sort of telling. And when I tell it, it becomes your experience. Like there's like a
this transmission you were talking about that has transmission has a different connotation. If you are talking about informatics or if you are talking about psychology, for example. Transmission in psychology means something different, means something that sometimes is pre-linguistic and has to do with our physiology or something evolutionary or something from our animal, being. Sometimes has to do with the reservoir of social knowledge. And so, of course, this kind of transmission that we have as humans is very different from this transmission, this is what's very interesting to me, in which ways you can have this even though before you know for sure that this was there, like you felt identify or empathy because of the objects of study or causes, you told me you also feel this violence thing, like very closely or very deeply.
No, it's true because that whole thing, he warns against fascism, basically, and, unfortunately, that led to his death. So, it is a very raw thing for me sometimes.
Yeah, it was a kind of really powerful, let's say, performance and happening he did with his life, with the story of his life, plus the legacy we have of his thinking, because it's so enlightening and it's so empowering to really, even a century afterwards, to think about the micropolitics of power, something that philosophers like Foucault actually half a century after studied, and to transmit to like a 90-year-old, 80-year-old like me, and that I didn't have the context of, but I really felt the urge, For example, he was saying something, paraphrasing Kant, he was saying, as an imperative category Kantian, he was saying, live your life in such a way that fascism couldn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
So all his work, I think, is also wrote from this perspective of the here and now, and this is very contagious, and this is the huge legacy in a way, even though it's so sad always,
Yeah, but it's the sensitivity again. I just think that he sounds like he was a really sweet person, and I think that, and I've heard he was sweet because I also read some, his wife, Dora, was my mother's grandmother, and they were very close, so that we had more of a, I didn't meet her, but there's more of a relationship there. And I've read letters, I actually translated a letter that Dora wrote to a mutual friend, Gerhard Scholem, who's also connected to this sort of Frankfurt school.
Yeah.
And she says, and it's after my great-grandfather died, and she talks about, she talks about like, how could the world, like, because she just says how he's such a sweet person, and like how sort of, now I'm forgetting it now, how such a sweet person could sort of leave the world, kind of thing. Like, I don't know.
But I think I perceive the intention, because it's kind of what he transmits.
Yeah.
And people that get interested in history, in literature, in aesthetics, in culture, because of his writings.
Yeah.
They also perceive this, I think, and this kind of sadness is also transmitted. But this was urgent to be transmitted. This was these times where the whole world was being divided into two systems of unique ideas.
Right.
There was one unique idea of communism and one unique idea of fascism, and it looked like the whole world was going to end itself on this false dichotomy in a way, So this was really, I think, he transmits very well what this felt,
right, yeah,
for something that was sensitive to this,
Yeah. And I remembered something else sad about this letter, because my great-grandmother says in it, it wouldn't have happened if she had been there. Like, he wouldn't have taken his life, And that's another, I don't know, like, because then you can see that she's carried something of it, and, but yeah.
And also that I like that I feel you must have felt also close to. He wrote a lot of text about things that were banal in a way, like close things or day-to-day life.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why that pipe story again. It's like, why did he even bother to to explain it? And there's another one I love, because he writes about food. This is again like, because I never think of him as a typical academic, because he also wrote these sort of columns for the newspapers, and he wrote this one for the Frankfurter Zeitung about figs.
Yeah.
And he goes to, he's basically saying that you can never experience like a food to its full until you've like excessed on it. And and then he talks about how he's in Italy and he's at a market and this woman has these gorgeous looking figs and he buys like half a pound or something. Is that a lot? I'm not even sure. And then he realized she doesn't have anything to wrap it in because like all the local women bring their own wicker baskets and he doesn't have a basket, so he has to stuff all the figs in his pockets and he stuffs them in his hands and he stuffs them in his mouth and he sort of and the interesting thing is because the whole day he's been deciding whether there's a letter he wants to post and he's been deciding whether to tear it up or not, and then after he's gorged on the figs he just tears it up, you know. But it's interesting because this is another thing, like I adore figs. It's actually something I only discovered after I moved to Germany, because in England, like the supermarkets, the food, you don't get this, like in Berlin, I really noticed.
Fish and chips.
Well, but in the supermarket, like there's everything all year round, whereas you don't have, like the figs are not really featured, whereas when I moved to Berlin, it was like, it's the rhubarb season, it's the apricot season, it's now, which I kind of resented at first because I'm like, why can't I get tender stem broccoli? And then I realised I was being a completely spoilt, you know, and I love it, and you know, and I only anyway. So when all the figs came, I really sort of started enjoying figs, and I had an experience at the supermarket, and this is before I had read this piece, and I had run out of space in my bag because the guy, like the supermarket guy, actually he's like, because I used to buy like 16 figs at a time, and he would be like, the figs, only 12 today, is it? And then, so I kind of got chummy with him anyway. And then one day I like had put all my shopping in, and I had to put my figs in my pocket. I didn't stuff them in my mouth, but and then I read this piece, and it just made me laugh.
So it happened exactly the same to you.
And it was exactly, well, yeah, almost. And it just made me laugh because I was like, what a coincidence. But I just love. Yeah, I love. I
feel it's also there's also similarity in the way of thinking about this. Events.
This is the thing. He's so, you know, it's like it's exactly it. It's like an everyday kind of banal situation, but then he makes it. Because he talks about this excess, and he says, I ate it to destroy it. Like it's
feels guilty.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Because of eating too much.
Because he talks about, this kind of like real, I don't know.
That's amazing. Did he wrote a lot about food? Do you know that?
Well, I think there's another one he writes about maybe what's the soup called? Borscht, is it?
Borscht, it saved my life once in Moscow.
I can't remember that, but he wrote, I don't know whether it was a regular column, I'm not sure, but I know that there's a sort of a food series, but the fresh figs one is really nice. Yeah.
I started to read it when you told me about this anecdote. I started to read, and it starts already very fun.
Yeah. No, it's.
And do you know by like internal information in the family or about his behavior, for example, with food? Do you know if he are there things known about this? I don't know.
And I think that he wasn't necessarily the fittest. I think it, you know, when he did his last journey across the Pyrenees, I think he was in a group, and I think he had to, you know, stop quite a bit, and he was sort of gets out of breath. He wasn't, and he had his
he smoked a
pipe.
lot.
He smoked, exactly. I mean, he wrote about hashish as well. You know, he
wrote about hashish.
Yeah,
did you read this? I know.
Well, this was one of the first things. Actually, this is one of the first things I was given. But I was given like Berliner Kindheit, Berlin childhood, on hashish, and
right.
What was the other one? Yeah, but I can't remember much of it. But it's interesting, this kind of, because he's so dreamlike and kind of, you know, it kind of fits he's into all this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you feel identified with this dreamy person thing? Like,
I guess
I don't know. Since you were doing so many like theater things. And
sure,
so
I mean, I love doing all that. I like acting. Well, the reason I like acting so much actually is because it's about empathy at heart. And I feel that like he seems to me like he was an empathetic character. I mean, I'm not sure there's any connection there. I can't tie everything to him, but
of course,
I'm just saying that. You know,
but I
if
guess
you ask
it's very cool for you to study theater because your great grandfather was hanging out with Bertolt Brecht, for example.
Yeah, there was a nice exhibition about them together at the Académie de Künste here a couple of years ago. But yeah, no, I mean, I really like the theatre. There's a very kind of electric kind of feeling when you're on stage and in a role, and it's nice.
The here and now.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely a special thing, and you react off the audience. Well, I always thought that because it's amazing the difference between like the dress rehearsal and the actual having an audience is you could feel it. Yeah, it's a different. There's something in the air.
Sure,
yeah.
I can infer something of it because of playing music live, for example, and the uniqueness of that.
Yeah, it's a performance. Yeah,
and. So you feel like this kind of playful thinking or being is something...
I always feel playful, I don't know.
Of course. Well, then it's...
I mean, what is life if not absurd? I don't know.
But
like
not everyone thinks like that, you know?
Maybe not, I don't know.
This is a point of view, let's say. This is a point of view that and not everyone take that point of view.
Well, I don't know, it's more... maybe it's just the way that's more fun for me, I don't know.
But it's very interesting. And do you think he was... Because you're into gardening, you told me.
Oh, I am into gardening. Yeah, I love my plants, yeah.
You know, if this is also an inheritance or...
I don't know. Well, my mother likes being in the garden. I mean, I used to help my neighbour with her gardening when I was younger. So I don't know. I suppose it's just like a connection to the... outside world. That always kind of makes me think about Marx and kind of alienation and nature and stuff. But I definitely, there's something very special about, because I do a lot of propagation, and there's something very special. I mean, sometimes I try and grow things from just a node, you know, like you don't have a leaf on it even. You have to.
So you're a gardening nerd.
Well,
something.
I'm an indoor
gardening.
I mean, basically, when I have a hobby, I tend to go fairly all in.
Okay.
So I don't know. So like seeing something grow from, you know, a node is like a part on like if you have a stem, like the bit where the leaf comes from, and you can, you know, that like if you put it in water, that like roots will grow from it, and so you can grow it from that into like a plant, and seeing it like push out new leaves, and like there's something very...
I know.
Nice, like calming. I go and check them every day, and I'm like, you know, it's nice to see a little new shoot. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, there's something very calming, very meditative, very zen about it. My girlfriend does that compulsively, makes like clones or new plants out of little plants and so, and it's very enjoyable when from time to time I perceive the growth, and it's like, wow, it's a plant now.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, I had one that, you know, sometimes that things, you're like, why is this plant looking sick? And you're trying, like one, you know, I had a fig, they're very fussy, these ficus or Ficus benjamina.
Yeah.
And anyway, it looks like, and I think it like the roots were too wet. I didn't really know what I was doing, and then at that time, and then but I revived it. And like it's amazing, like that is also like a really satisfying thing. If it's not doing too well, I like repotted it. I soaked the roots in some hydrogen peroxide to kind of try and get rid of the bacteria.
Wow!
And then it's
like voodoo.
Science. Who knew? And because it helps, like it oxidates the soil. So
vegan voodoo.
Yeah.
Wow.
And now it's doing really well again, and that's like. It's touching, you know, that's like, oh, I've managed to... I mean, it was probably doing badly because of me in the first place, but the fact that I managed to bring it back was...
And you have this nerdy tendency with all the hobbies you make?
Well, I don't know, I like...
not everyone is like a syntax nerd, for example.
Yeah, I like syntax. Well, because I'm a translator, so I guess like I... Yeah, like I like... and I did a lot of logic. So the kind of philosophy I did logic, and I'm quite interested in this. So I don't know. There's something very satisfying about. And German, I find that's maybe a reason why I love that language so much, because of there's a lot going on with the word order, and yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I probably do tend to go all in. I do a lot of medical translation as well. That's one of the areas I specialise in.
I like technical writing.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I love like physiology. So sometimes I'll like...
You do this as a job?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then I have to, I research the physiology. Sometimes I watch lectures on, whatever, because it's, you have to understand what you're, or at least to some extent, what you're doing, what you're translating,
You're right, syntaxes.
Yes, exactly.
But you have this, because of your mother lineage in a way, librarian and so.
Well, this is definitely connected, because another really interesting thing is that, this is some of the Walter Benjamin stuff that I first read was, he has this stuff like Kinderetymologie. It's like, it's like the etymology of children's words, and he wrote down all the little things that my grandfather said, that my grandfather said as a toddler. Like he wrote, and he kept this book. And my mother did the same for us as children. She wrote, because we would say weird things, children get the words wrong. But it's interesting, it's like about linguistics, how children use language. And he did that for his son, and my mother did that for us. So there's obviously this interest in language is very present in the family.
So there are rituals, there are
but my mother didn't know he had done that. Yeah.
Okay.
It was a complete coincidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like Jung called these asynchronicities.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Or acasual effects. You know, that logically cannot be possible, but there is something. Okay. And of course, it's very interesting with there's genetics involved, but we are still discovering it until which extent there is effects and which way are effects. And for us, since everything has to do with thoughts and emotions, this is where we try to grasp it from, in a way. Yeah. And you're also into antiques.
God, I sound like that. Well, I get. Well, this is the thing. This is definitely from my mother's family, from the whole Benjamin side. But there's like a thing to do with like the old world. I don't know, this sort of academic interest, but I studied classics, that's Latin and Greek and stuff, and I was into like antiques because we had all these things in the family as well.
You studied ancient history.
Oh, well, Latin, Greek, ancient history, philosophy, like linguistics, like all this, yeah. But because they all this is probably really weird, but I've got my great grandmother's chopping board and I still use it. And it's a really beautiful piece of wood, but I'm like, is that normal? Like, do most families? But everything is kept, and it's like these old things. And, I don't know, I collected stamps and I played the organ and, I had all these old interests as well. But I also have modern interests as well, obviously.
A bit obsessive compulsive.
I don't know. No, I don't, well, maybe, yeah. I don't know.
I also had the stamps books from my grandfather, right. And I was fascinated by it. Yeah. And I add up some things, but I'm not the type of guy that could collect the whole life, like these physical things. Yeah.
No, but my mother always said this thing with the collecting. She was like, you have one, that's nice, you have two, that's a little bit. You have three. She's like, you got to have the set or whatever. But the collecting
this is
thing,
a bit
but the collecting thing definitely comes from the whole collecting books. I think from my mother's side, because her father was a book collector. I think he had the largest collection of maps outside the British Museum or something of London.
Wow.
He had a bookshop in London and. There's definitely the collecting that's all from my mother's side for sure.
And you feel that. Since you feel close to some of this heritage, you feel a bit of a burden or a necessity or responsibility to
preserve stuff, you mean? Yeah. I'm sure there's I'm sure that, a lot of this holding on to stuff is, it's probably this transgenerational trauma stuff again, because, when my... and this isn't just the Benjamins, because my mother's mother was also from Berlin. Both my grandparents on that side are from Berlin.
Yeah.
And she was not Jewish, but her stepfather was, so they also left. And he had a gallery. He was an art dealer, and talking about this idea of hoarding, or not hoarding, it's not quite, but but
that's a new concept.
Preserving, like, you know, because if you have to leave a country, all that stuff is lost. It gets left behind, and it doesn't come with you. You know, so that I think that there's you know, the next generation, like. You know, like when you hold on to things, you know, there's a...
I think it's the opposite of hoarding, if you take it that way, because hoarding, it's take it something industrial, reproduced.
No, but sometimes there's a fear of, if something's been taken away, it's like a fear of getting rid of things, maybe, or something like this, is what I mean.
But like this chopping...
No, the chopping board is shared because it's beautiful as well, and it's treasured.
Of course, but it's not
and
like
it's
a hoarder, you know, it's this unique object that has this unique... aura, I will say, to be pertinent to the...
But this is, it's funny actually, because one of my good friends that I went to like nursery school with, and so I've known her since I was 3, and she sort of said, oh, you'll only be happy sort of doing physical things. And I don't know, like I'm not a very digital person in some ways, and I do have this, like...
That's why I had to ask you to send me facts about you, because they were not in the internet.
Well, exactly. But I can't remember what I was going to go with that. But the antiques. So, like, for example, and the reusing. That was it, because that's the thing. And it's like in my family, like a thing gets used until it, like, as long as it's still useful. You know, like the chopping board is useful still, and it's so like, why would you not keep it?
But do you think it's only from an utilitarian point of view? Or do you
it's beautiful as well. But I also like, you know, most of the furniture in my flat is like, you know, I don't like buying new things because I don't like consumerism either. So like that's another reason why I like these. And I don't know, they've got character. So like I've got so many stories, but I've got some really nice things, and a lot of them, you know, like. You get them secondhand, and like I've had so many stories because I've carried so many tables and chairs across Berlin. Like you know, I've got like 2 chairs at each arm, or I've got a table, and then someone's like, "Oh, can I help you carry it?" And then we get into a conversation, and then come up to my flat.
Berlin.
It's like, and then I'm like, "Oh, that really made my day," you know, like having that random conversation with that woman, and she was really, and you know, yes, I was with this woman once, and she couldn't help me. She offered to help me carry the table. And then she got tired, and she's like, I can't do it anymore, because I had been carrying. It was like midday heat, and I had got to Bodinstrasse. Like I had been carrying. Like when I turned up, basically the guy was like, "Have you not got anyone else?" And I was like, "No, it's fine. I can carry it." And because I am quite strong actually. But then it was just the dimensions were just a bit cumbersome. So then it was like And it was like 30-something degrees, and I was just like, okay, just doing it bit by bit. I was only like a 15-minute walk. But anyway, then this woman at the traffic light offers to help.
Yeah.
And then she couldn't go much longer. So then she like called a stranger, and she's like, oi, you know, will you help this woman?
I like this. It's so like punk.
Well, she did. Well, yeah. and then he like offered, and he came all the way up to my flat with me and offered to like carry it up for me. It was really sweet. Yeah.
Do you feel this is something typical from Berlin, or?
I don't know. I guess probably there's probably
because
like an
you can be
aspect
treated like shit also in Berlin.
I mean, I've had people, you know, called me. I don't know. Once I was sort of walking down there, I was obviously in this guy's way or whatever, or I was walking too slowly. I don't know what it was, but he
So, sorry, but to go back to the burden part.
Sorry, I'm just rambling.
No, it's totally part of the non-scripted structure. I feel like because of your characteristics and because of how you perceive things, and so I'm sure, I mean, you don't have to tell me that, of course, this is a huge burden in a part, because you seem like perfect, you know, to put in value, put in perspective, conserve and preserve from the perspective, from my opinion, Benjamin's view or tone, you know, on the world.
That's very
so
touching.
If you perceive something from this, I can imagine it must add up to this feeling of responsibility, maybe, I don't know. But maybe it's something you experience more like in a lighter manner, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I've never really known any. I mean, I definitely, you know, I wouldn't change it. That's certainly true, you know. But certainly, like I don't know. You know, it's like, yeah, preserve it. I mean, sometimes I feel, you know, maybe I should have, you know, done more with it, or I don't know, but.
But what I wanted to say also, with what I just said, is like Benjamin put a lot of value in how you are into your day-to-day life, you know, how you perceive things and put value on things that sometimes escapes and so.
Right.
This you're already doing from my side, you know,
Okay.
which is from Benjamin's construction, perception of value.
Right.
It's already doing something that can have an effect in a way. How do you feel in general, you yourself? How do you feel in general of the future? And
God.
it's just in general, like
Yeah.
you know, I find a lot of people who immediately tell me like we have hope and so.
I mean,
and I have
I'm
people
worried
that tell
about,
me
yeah.
that I mean, it's done, you know.
I mean, I'm very worried about climate change. I mean, that does scare me.
Yeah, it scares us all, I think.
Yeah. And I get worried about, I mean, yeah, like I said, you know, I'm not a particularly digital, but, you know, like sometimes I worry about things getting too alienated from the physical, you know, like whether I will, you know, I just feel a bit precarious sometimes that maybe, I don't know how the world will go. I don't know what if Elon Musk will take over and we'll all be kind of God knows what. But
it's looking more and more like the science fiction books I used to read when I was a kid.
Yeah. Well, you'd be interested actually because Walter Benjamin's wife, Dora, I said she wrote a book, and I'm now translating her novel, and it's a science fiction. It's kind of like an early
feminist. This is the grant
yeah.
you earned for translating this.
Yeah.
But she had things published already, or?
She was a journalist, and this was published in 1930 and 1930. It was basically published as a serialized novel in the newspaper. So, like reconstructing it was a big mission. We had to get to the archives, and I think because she was also a Jewish woman, it I don't know, it just kind of got buried after the Nazi time. So. Yeah.
This was, anthropological, archaeological.
But it's about developing a gas that combats, it's about gas kind of warfare,
Yeah. I think it has a lot of value because it has to do also with recovering the voice of a female.
Exactly,
you know,
exactly.
That,
yeah.
Also.
So the main characters are women, yeah.
Okay.
As well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, going back to the first thing I said, that it was like, of course, I don't like this because it has something of a patriarchy, you know, like always assigning the women to the name or the office or of the men, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, nowadays, luckily, in a lot of sense, happily, I think, for Benjamin, would be these times a bit further away from those thinkings, you know. This is why now we can endeavor in this, like, recovering history from other perspectives, you know. So it has a lot of value in this way. Have you read it already?
The novel? Yes, I have. It's good. Like I really like the way she writes as well. Like she also, you can see the humor in it, and the again the way because it's the parts of it are set in Berlin, and the descriptions. There's also a scene about plants in it, which is wonderful.
You see, there is the transmission.
But she also worked as a translator. Actually, she translated G.K. Chesterton novels like The Father Brown. I don't know if you know these sort of British.
Don't know.
She translated them from English into German.
Okay.
Interestingly, but. Yeah, the novel is interesting in that they're trying to. I mean, I don't want to give it away, but they're.
No spoilers.
Yeah, but there's some beautiful it gives a very interesting picture of that kind of Weimar Republic. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, of course, it was a turbulent time where minorities and targeted groups were silenced and buried without a name, without a history, and they represented a lot of the history and the views that were left behind in a way, you know. That was so important to recover it in times like, I think a lot of people will agree, it's very much needed, you know. this perspective, like regaining sensitivity against violence, systematized production that is destroying the planet, you know, and things like that. On art review, I think he wrote for exhibition of Paul Klee.
Yeah, well, he had, well, I don't know if he collected, he had that his angel.
Exactly, that everyone that studied art read this, of course.
Yeah.
But for me, it's very, very important because,
I love Paul Klee,
again, he gave me an idea on, I studied the film and then art, but I had no idea on how to talk about painting.
Yeah, okay.
And really, Benjamin gave me this example, you know. For example, relating it to a zeitgeist, you know, and to something that for him was important to preserve as a perception of the times, right? So Paul Klee's angel is kind of like a Picasso, totally, you know, deconstructed, unlike the previous angels, you know, of history. He was saying Paul Klee's angel of history. Looks back and sees a world in ruins.
Right, yeah.
And this describes perfectly like this feeling like if we are optimistic, this is a feeling that will empower you for stop wanting to destroy the planet.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I mean, I do consider myself an optimistic person. I always just believe, well, I don't know, like, I mean, that's not true. That's definitely not true that you just... It's not like you believe something and it will... You know, there are problems that stop things from happening in the world. But no, but I'm generally an optimistic person. It's like I do yoga as well, and I always... that's the kind of thing. I always just believe I'm going to go into the pose. But no, like, I think, like, you know, I try to see, like, positives in things and see the best in things. Maybe I'm sometimes even a bit naive. But no, like, I'm definitely worried at the same time. You know, there's various things one doesn't have control over.
Yeah, but how will you change it in the good way if you're not able to live like that or to think like that?
Well, I don't know. I have to live in a way that I feel comfortable with myself. You know, like it pains me if I don't know. Like with recycling and stuff, I can't bring myself to. I don't know. It's just if I can do it, then I'll do it. It doesn't, you know. I mean, maybe who knows whether it even helps, but I can't bring myself to throw a glass in the bin or whatever. You know, like I just can't do it. Sorry.
And which thing you think could change for the better? Like this, if this change, like do you have a perception or intuition, or if you are an optimistic, let's say?
Well, you mean specifically in relation to the climate, or just in general in the world? What could change for the better? I don't know. I mean, there's possibilities of like things changing, sort of politically. Maybe.
You think a change of conscience, if possible?
I mean, there's definitely seems to be a return. Well, it's different because, you know, we're so consumeristic at the same time, but there is a return to kind of appreciating the kind of, you know, at least in some, you know, people are aware of these things, you know, at least in some dimension. So I don't know, and people are aware that more and more that big companies should be taxed and stuff. I don't know. It's a question of whether one has enough power to push these things through, but...
Let's hope they do. Thank you, Flossie, for being here. High five. Yeah. We will leave some links for references in the description. And thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.